You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For over 40 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Alan Weitz.
Greetings and welcome to the B&H Photography Podcast. Today, John and I return to an interesting topic that we first discussed back in 2019. You remember that year, don't you? Memory cards, hard drives, and storage solutions. And we're delighted to welcome back to the program our favorite member of the channel marketing team at Western Digital, Pete Isgrigg. Pete was so on point the last time we had him on. One of our listeners, Liz, otherwise known as ELB, requested we have him back. Well, thank you, Liz, and thank you, Pete, for joining us once again. Just as a reminder, Western Digital, which makes their own line of portable hard drives and other storage devices, is also the parent company of G Technology and SanDisk. So Pete is the primo go-to guy on a range of data storage products, and we're happy to welcome him back to the show. Thanks to Pete for being here again.
Hey, guys, thanks for having me.
That's terrific. Oh, by the way, we're going to link the previous episode you recorded with us in our show notes. But the last time we had you on the show, we talked about memory myths, and you answered questions about formatting cards, about reusing memory cards, and the differences between the various hard drives. Today, we hope we can update us and our listeners as to the latest tools, formats, interfaces, and best practices. So since we last spoke in the summer of 2019, lots has happened. What has changed in that time? Because, the cameras have gotten a lot more serious.
As cameras get more serious, obviously the ability to capture the images and store the data has to get a lot more serious and has to keep up with it. So we're getting faster memory cards, we're getting higher capacity memory cards because these new formats and these new video modes, they're just tons of more data. So everything is getting bigger and faster just to keep up with the pace of it. And unfortunately, memory cards can't get all that much bigger to be, physically speaking. So the technology has to change. The flash memory has to change. The type of interface has to change so that you can still have a tiny little card, but it can keep up with this growing digital photography format changes.
I would imagine it's pretty challenging. How much further do you think we could push the current formats that we have, the current cards that we're using, before they just can't get any smaller with good results? Any idea?
In terms of I think we can get a few more decades out of CF Express and SD cards because they're always changing. And you'll see it over the last 2 decades in SD cards. That's what, when you look at SD formats and you see SD, SDHC, XC, and now, as of about 2 years ago, they released the UC format of SD cards. That's essentially what's allowing these flash memory cards to stay in their existing form factor, but to have more capacity in them. Because, flash memory is surface area. If you want to get larger, you have to go more surface area, but that means larger cards. You can't do that. So it's like Manhattan buildings. You build up rather than out. And that's what those memory card formats do, is they basically stack flash memory on top of each other and allow for more memory to be in that same sort of space. It's just up instead of out. And eventually you're going to get to the point where you can't stack any more flash memory on top of each other and it gets too thick for an SD format, and that will go away at some point. But the same will be said about CF Express and XQD and those formats. So it's just a matter of at what point does it get too large for the existing form factor, or at what point does new technology come out that makes the whole, that allows you to read and write more data in a smaller space and makes that flash memory wafer higher density, so to speak.
If you were buying a card right now, what would be the minimum you'd be buying as far as speed and performance? And again, I'm not saying for what camera, but cameras in general, for the average consumer camera.
Well, that answer I'd have to ask a few more questions about what type of photography you are, how much you're shooting, how often you're shooting, et cetera, to sort of get the best answer there. But generally speaking, if you're a standard base sort of hobbyist level photographer, you're going to probably want to look to the memory cards that 95 megabytes per second write speeds is probably a good place to land into in terms of also slightly future-proofing yourself. But at the same time, I don't like to say that because, if you're using a memory card every single week or several times a week, I don't want to tell you to use that same memory card for 3 to 5, 10 years or so. I want to tell you use a different memory card every year or two, especially if this photography is your livelihood. So, I would say that the standard SD, XC cards, UHS-1 speeds, which get that sort of 95 megabyte write speeds, that's your base level. That's probably the mid-level. That also helps you in the more professional sense as well.
I guess a big factor is are you on a tripod shooting landscapes, or are you shooting sporting events and shooting flat out all the time at whatever the maximum speed, right?
If you're a wildlife photographer or an action adventure photographer, you'll probably want to get faster speed cards, but you also want to look to the video speed rating on the cards. What's that V speed that you see on the cards, whether it's V10, V30, V90. That is essentially the minimum write speed that the card is capable of without being primed. Because memory cards, you can't write to the full speed of the card at a moment's notice. It sort of needs to be primed the same way that a car's engine, you can't immediately be at 60 miles an hour. You have to
there always goes 0 to 60 and whatever that time is. That
right, and there's that sort of same element with memory cards. So if you're shooting, wildlife photography and you're sitting there waiting for that animal to appear and you've got 3 seconds that it appears and then it's gone, you need a card that's going to be able to write faster at a moment's notice when your camera's been idle. So you want to look to faster video speed memory cards. You want to look to those V90 cards, because what that means is it idles at 90 megabytes a second, or V30 idles at 30 megabytes a second, which means that at a moment's notice, you can start writing that speed to your card, which will allow you to take more photos at a moment's notice in a short time frame.
So if you're using older cards and newer cards on the same shoot, you can really mess yourself up, because obviously from what you're telling me is if you're trying to nail something, specifically say a bird taking off or hitting the water, whatever the case may be, something that is really split second, you have to be able to anticipate that. So if you're using an older card, you got to press that button down a little sooner than you would with a newer, quicker
exactly
card.
And you won't get nearly as many photos as you would have if you're using a newer card with the higher ratings on it. I tend to tell people replace the memory card every year or two, and for that reason, buy low capacity memory cards, buy 64 gig or 128 gigabyte memory cards, so that when you do replace them, you're talking $10-20 rather than $500 for a 1 terabyte card or something to that effect. Especially if this is your livelihood. If you're a professional photographer, you're shooting for clients, you're on a job, you don't want to run the risk that you lose a card or an image or 2 images, or have a whole card fail on you. So I tell people in more professional situations, replace those cards at least once a year.
You brought up another topic which I never knew about, or another interesting issue, and that is don't use the same card in different cameras. You can, but it's really not a good practice because of the formatting issues, and that is something I took pretty seriously and stuck to, and I found that to be pretty valuable as well. So I imagine that also has to do with the longevity and performance of the card.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people not to mix cards in different camera bodies, because the directory file that's written on the memory card, that little file that tells the hardware that you're using, your camera or your computer, where the free storage is, where memory is written, and how to interact with the flash storage on the card, it's written very differently with each host device. And so if you format your card in the camera on, say, whatever Nikon you have, and then you move it into even just a different Nikon or a Canon model camera, those directory files are slightly different between it. They'll write slightly different to the card, and it increases the likelihood of data failure. So, always use it in the card you formatted, the camera that you formatted it in. And that brings me sort of another point. Always format a memory card in the device you're using it in. Don't format it in a computer. Because again, that directory file is slightly different in your computer compared to those cameras. And it just slightly increases the chance of having corruption in the card.
Is this an issue if you're using two of the same model cameras?
It is not.
Okay.
So if you have two of the same model, you can switch cards between them freely.
Okay, but if you have the same manufacturer but two different models, that's
I would
when you
still
could have an issue.
recommend reformatting the card.
Okay.
If you do have to switch and use that same card in a different camera, reformat the card before you start using it in that second camera. And again, keep in mind, you lose the data that's on the card when you reformat it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
do you recommend reformatting between jobs, for example? Let's say you
Yes.
downloaded, you do.
Yeah,
Okay.
I sort of recommend, rather than deleting photos off of a card after you've offloaded them somewhere else, just reformat the card and start fresh. I think reformatting the card to start fresh with that camera is something to do quite frequently. It's the same way that people tell you, don't leave your phone or your computer running for too long. Restart your computer every so often, restart your phone every so often. There just gets to, it collects a certain amount of software corruption on memory cards and in computers and phones if you leave them running for too long. And eventually you will start to see errors because of that.
All this said, I just want to kind of throw out here that I've had a couple of memory cards now that I've been using. The 64 gig memory cards I've been using now for 5 years. And I actually re-upped recently. I bought a whole, 3 new ones. But they worked, fine. I never had any issues. So, I mean, I
And I
understand
sold them when I was finished. I used them for 4 years before I sold them to John.
I know.
And they're still holding up.
Still working.
No,
I had to scratch all that dirt off it, but it was good,
Right. None of what I'm saying is like absolutes. It's not, or it's not saying that these things will happen. We're talking very minor percentage increase in likelihood of corruption and data failure. You should get a very long life out of a card. You should get 5-10 years out of a memory card, if not longer, depending on how much you're using it. But if this is your profession, if this is your livelihood, do you really want to take chances with image corruption and whatnot, and losing that one photo or 2 photos, or, God forbid, losing the whole, having the whole card get corrupted or whatnot? It's just, at what point is $20 worth, the entire job that you're being paid for, or your reputation as a whole?
I have a question, and I want to jump in a second over to talk about CF Express and XQD and other formats. But what kind of risks do we take when we're putting a memory card in and out of an SD slot, for example? Because there are many times where it doesn't fit quite right, and I feel like I'm going to damage, the connectors.
Yeah, I mean, the more you can keep a card in the camera, the better, because they're little pieces of plastic, and you're going to break the cards. You're going to snap them. A piece is going to chip off, and something's going to happen to it. Or the more you remove a card from a camera, the more likely you are to lose that card, or to step on it, or to have some other physical damage to the card. So I try to tell people, keep the cards in there as much as you can and just wipe them, reformat them, the way you can. Or when you do have to remove them, just make sure you're handling them with care.
And also put them into the camera, never at an angle, because remember, you can mess up the card and you could lose your card, but you could also mess up the contacts and leads in the camera itself.
Exactly.
You don't want to deal with that at all.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So can we talk about CF Express and XQD, and can you just kind of describe a little bit to our listeners the differences that they can expect using that card and what cameras? I mean, I noticed now that the Z9, the new Nikon, is compatible with both cards, and they don't have an SD card, or unless there's some sort of adapter that you can use for SD. I don't know, but can you just talk about those cards a bit?
Yeah, definitely. CF Express is going to be the future of memory cards, and it's going to be the format that's going to be in more professional level photography cameras and film cameras and whatnot. In part because it's going to get so much faster speeds out of it than SD cards. SD cards max out right now around 300 megabytes per second, whereas CF Express cards can get 1700 megabytes per second. So it's just going to be, that's where the technology is going. And you're going to start to see SD probably get phased out in more professional level cameras. It's not going to get phased out of the more intermediate levels. And you still are going to see a lot of cameras that have both slots in it, because the cost between the two is still quite high and probably will be for a long time. So for a lot of people buying CF Express cards, you're going to spend $100 for a 128 gig card, whereas a 128 gig SD card is going to probably run you $25-$30 or so.
Right. And XQD?
XQD is going to remain Sony proprietary. You're only going to see it in Sony cameras. CF Express is open source, so it's going to be more compatible. It's going to be in more cameras. It's going to be in more camera manufacturers as well, whereas XQD is going to stay in Sony cameras. But they're the same form factor. They look identical. They'll fit in the same slots. They just won't work unless one is compatible with the other. And there are a few legacy Sony model cameras that you can do a firmware upgrade and make those XQD slots CF Express compatible so that you can get that faster speed and the more open source cards. And the one big thing about CF Express versus XQD is besides the speed difference, because XQDs tap out around 400 megabytes per second, I think, or 440 or something like that. So CF Express is going to be up to 3 times faster. But one of the things about CF Express is it doesn't data throttle. So you don't see the slowdowns when you start using it. And for those of you who aren't familiar with data throttling, when you use flash memory, it heats up. And basically, in order to manage the heat and to prevent the flash memory from overheating and melting and being damaged, what these devices do are they turn themselves on and off in nanosecond intervals to basically reduce the amount of heat that the card is generating. And when it does that, what you see is decrease in read-write speeds. So as you start to use the card, it heats up, it starts to slow down. You don't get that same amount of slowdown with CF Express because there's heat management built into the flash memory and into the card itself. So it still will throttle a little bit, but not much. Whereas XQD starts to throttle significantly after a little bit of time. So if you're offloading that card, you're going to notice that you're getting half the read-write speed it's capable of, if you're trying to offload a full, say, 128 gigabytes worth of files.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so that's a bit aimed toward, right at this point anyway, for the pro shooters and the enthusiasts. The rest of us are still using SD cards, and you have a lot of options. I mean, there's SDXC, SDHC, Extreme Pro. Can you maybe break that down a little bit to know what people might want to get? Let's talk a typical weekend photographer, weekend wildlife photographer, somebody who's not a professional, but they want to get the best performance they can.
Yep. So I would say look to our Extreme or our Extreme Pro UHS-1 cards for sort of a intermediate or hobbyist photographer. Those are going to be the ones that are going to provide the right speeds, the right idle speeds, and allow you to capture photos and everything else you want to do with the camera without really seeing any delays in it. And those are going to be the most cost effective. We have lower speed cards. We have the ultra line of cards. Those are for really basic point and shoot cameras. Those are not for DSLRs, I would say. Those are for more of those little rectangular cameras that, existed in the early 2000s or something that everybody had before there were cameras on their phones.
Right. And can I kind of define the differences between extreme and what does extreme mean? Does it have to do with the physical nature of the card, or does it have to do with speed?
It's just the name that we've assigned to the card. It's just our
branding,
our product
right?
name. Exactly, it's branding. But it just sort of indicates the level of card. So our extreme card, we did use that name because it is for more extreme photography situations. It is for more higher need photography situations. Then you get into the Extreme Pro, you put the word pro on there, it tends to get, it means it's going for the pro photographer a little bit more. But it just comes down to how much speed do you want? If you're shooting a full 128 gigabyte card, the UHS-1 Extreme Pro cards will read that card faster when you're offloading into a computer. Probably, depending on which model Extreme Pro card you get, it can write it almost twice as fast, or can read it twice as fast. So, it's how much time do you want to waste or spend offloading images and whatnot, versus how much money do you want to pay for a card
Gotcha.
as well.
Gotcha. All right. Maybe as we kind of wrap up this half of the show, can you talk a little bit about formats that we're not going to see anymore? I mean, I imagine CF, compact flash, standard, we won't be seeing that.
Could you also promise me that micro SD will never become a standard? The idea of a memory card that you could lose by sneezing frightens the death out of me.
Yep.
Right.
So
Those fall in your
SD
camera bag.
cards-
You'll never find them again, ever.
Yep. So micro SD cards are probably not going away anytime soon because they are used in phones and drones and action cameras and things that need that smaller format memory card. But here's one thing I will tell people that I see a lot of people make this mistake. Don't use a micro SD card in that little plastic adapter that comes with it, and then put that card in a full-size SD card slot in a DSLR camera. That little plastic adapter piece is cheap technology. It's not really designed to handle the amount of data throughput that a camera will read and write to a card. And it will result in image corruption, and it will result in data loss at a significantly higher rate than just sort of any of the other little tips and tricks we've talked about earlier. I tell people only use a full-size SD card in a full-size SD slot. Save those micro SDs for the cameras that take them natively, for the GoPros, for the Samsung phones and things like that.
Or for transferring a file onto, say, a laptop that only has like an SD thing. I imagine it's okay for that, but don't shoot with it, correct?
I would say if you're going to use, yes, don't shoot with it. But if you're going to be using it in the, your MacBook's SD card slot, and you're going to be reading and writing data to it frequently, again, don't do it that way. For one-time use or in a pinch use, fine. But the more data you read and write through that little adapter piece, the more likely it is to corrupt. So just don't do it. I tell people don't do it at all. Buy a card reader that has a micro SD card slot in it,
Right.
which our little 3-in-1 card reader does. So I'd say buy our card reader. Don't use that
That's an
adapter
important
piece.
thing, because I think it would be horrible if people came away saying, I just heard you should never use these micro SDs. They're terrible. No, you can use them, but yet they have to be with the right reader.
Right. They're great
And that's
cards,
important.
and
Yeah.
they're perfect for what they're designed to be used
Sure.
in.
That reminds me, you mentioned card readers, and it's something that I don't use as much as I used to, partly because I have, SD slots in my laptop and my computers. But is there a big difference in what's available out there, and are manufacturers still putting them out as much as they used to? I mean, Wi-Fi is also a big, transferring data that way makes them less needed.
I tell everybody you should always have a card reader for offloading it, because for two reasons. One, don't connect your camera to your computer to offload a memory card that way, because A, you're wasting your camera's battery, and B, again, that USB port that your camera has, it's really not designed for a lot of data throughput, and it can result in images transferring incorrectly, whereas a card reader is designed for that. So I tell people always use a card reader so that you don't waste your camera's battery, and it decreases the likelihood of transfer image corruption in that sense. But mainly, a lot of memory cards are specifically, they get a lot faster read speeds in card readers as opposed to in cameras. So, for example, you use your camera to offload that memory card. I think it's going to max out at, you're using a UHS-1 SD card, our Extreme Pro cards. I think it's going to max out around 95 megabytes per second. I think it's going to be about the same as the write speed of the card, whereas that card is capable of 170 megabytes read speeds. So if you use a card reader, you're going to, you have to technically use our brand of card reader to get that full 170 megabytes, but you're going to get that much faster read speed out of it by using a card reader that you won't with the camera. So in theory, you can take about half the time to offload a full card if you're using a card reader.
And do the adapt, for example, some MacBooks now, and the smaller ones don't even have card slots. And they don't even have USB drives or standard USB. So you need adapters to connect the card reader to the laptop. And I imagine those slow things down a bit too. Is that true?
Not really. Depends on the adapter you use. If you use an old clunky one, yes. But the only hiccup you see with those is, obviously if you're going from USB-C to USB-A, it's going to be a significant speed difference, but still USB 3.0 and that USB-A connector, it's still faster than anything those card readers can throw at it. So,
okay, we are going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about hard drives and more with the Western Digital's Pete Isgrigg. Please stay tuned.
We hope you're enjoying this edition of the B&H Photography Podcast. The best way to support the show is by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. For links to gear and more information on today's guests, check out the show notes in your podcast app or visit our homepage on the B&H Explorer website and join the B&H Photography Podcast Facebook group. And now, back to the show.
Okay, we are back. And again, thanks again to Pete Isgrigg of Western Digital for joining us today. The first half of the show, we were talking about memory cards, and now we're going to be talking about storage devices. Now, you gave us a lot of information, do's and don'ts, and advice for pros, for consumers, and for amateurs. Let's talk about storage devices and external hard drives. What should one look for? What should one avoid? What are the qualifiers and attributes that make these things worth it or not worth it?
Yeah. So if you're a photographer, and I kind of put it this way, if you're any level photographer, and it doesn't matter if you're a hobbyist or if you're a professional shooting for clients and or Hollywood or wherever, I tell them, you only want to consider what's called an enterprise class hard drive. You want to, and that's the data center level hard drive. It's the high quality hard drive because.
Is that an industry term or is that a Western Digital term?
It's an industry term.
Okay.
You'll see that across the board with any hard drive out there. It's the hard drives that are in mainframe computers. It's the hard drives that are in Amazon's cloud services. They are hard drives that are engineered to spin and operate 24/7 and read and write data all day long without stressing or taxing the internal components of the drive. I try to convey to most people, not all hard drives are created equal. You're going to see different level of component quality, of engineering, and everything inside the hard drive that allows it to read and write more data, one more than the other. And that's why you see different priced hard drives and you see different level hard drives. Because these enterprise class ones are designed and engineered to spin better and to read and write more data. The metaphor I always use is, don't buy a Honda Civic to haul a 2-ton trailer. You buy a Dodge Ram truck. It's the same with hard drives. Yes, that Honda Civic will haul that 2-ton trailer. You'll get to where you need to go, but you're going to kill that car's engine in a short amount of time. Whereas if you use the Dodge Ram truck, you're going to get 20 years out of that truck hauling that 2-ton trailer every day. The same applies to any photographer. I consider a photographer's workload, whether you're a hobbyist or you're a professional, it's that same 2-ton trailer. You're reading and writing more data to a hard drive than anybody else is, and you need a hard drive that's capable of it. Because if you don't, you're putting stress on that drive. You're actually causing that drive to fail. You're giving it mechanical failure. And you're going to get maybe a year out of that drive, if you're lucky. Whereas these enterprise class level drives, you're going to get a full 5 years, if not 10 years out of it, if not more, using them every day because they're just rated and engineered to spin that way.
And so you're speaking about, like you said, using these, if you're using these every day or regularly for your photo work, if it's just something that you're storing.
If it's something you're using as a backup drive that gets written to once a week or once a month and it just sits on a desk, the more consumer level drives are fine for that. But if it's data that you're working off of, if it's your livelihood, if it's your career, enterprise class is the only way to go. And that sort of flows into, we have multiple brands, some geared towards consumers and some geared towards more professionals. And you mentioned G-Tech at the beginning of this podcast. And actually, technically speaking, the brand G-Tech no longer exists anymore. We actually transitioned it this past summer under the SanDisk brand, and now it's called SanDisk Professional. It's exactly the same drives, exactly the same quality, same everything, just with a new brand name on it. And essentially we did that because we're looking to start selling these more professional level hard drives outside of the United States, where SanDisk has brand reputation and recognition and G-Tech is unknown. It's not very easy to go into, a new territory and say, these are hard drives for the pros, just believe us. Whereas when you come in with a brand that they already know and they know that has professional quality memory cards, they're going to believe that you have professional quality hard drives. That's where these enterprise class level drives are. It's in our SanDisk professional line of hard drives. All of the drives inside of that are enterprise class. They're all the higher level spin 24/7, read and write data 24/7. So I tell a photographer, if you're looking at hard drives, SanDisk Professional should be the only brand of external hard drive you look at. Spend the $20, $30 extra. You will get 5 to 10 years out of that drive. Whereas if you buy our Western Digital line, our WD line of hard drives, our My Books, our My Passport drives, those are the consumer level drives. Those are going to last you, I'd say, if you got a full year out of them with a photographer's workflow, you've gotten a good life out of that drive. So I don't, if we were at a trade show right now, I'd have a tabletop of drives. I wouldn't have any of our WD drives out for the B&H customer, for the photographer customer. I'd be telling them only buy SanDisk Professional for that reason of using a Dodge Ram truck to haul a 2-ton trailer.
John asked earlier about cards and reusing them. And my question is, for drives that we're using for long-term storage, does it make a difference if they just sit untouched, or should they be started up and used on a semi-regular basis every month or every 6 months just to keep things going? Is there degradation if one of these units just sits?
Yes, absolutely. A mechanical spinning hard drive, you don't want to leave inactive for too long. You don't want to use it as archival storage that'll sit in a closet somewhere or on a shelf somewhere for years at a time. Best practices, I would say, at minimum, you should read and write to a spinning drive every 6 months, if not more often, every 3 months if possible. Otherwise, you're damaging the mechanical components in there by letting it sit inactive for too long. The same way, I'll go back to that car engine metaphor. The same way that you don't want to let a car engine sit inactive for too long. The next time you go to start it up, the parts that spin around may rust a little bit. And
you get flat spots on your tires. You got to move the thing around once a week.
Yep. Okay. So it's the same with hard drives. You want to make sure that you're using them frequently. Hard drives are not a good archival storage. You want to look, if you're looking at archival storage, honestly, tape drives are the best archival storage out there.
That was my next question. Okay.
That's really quite outdated technology at this point and very difficult to use in most traditional and more sort of intermediate level computer setups and whatnot. I would tell most people the next place to go is SSD drives, solid state drives. Those are going to be a lot more reliable than a hard drive. They don't have the spinning mechanical components in it. They can sit on a shelf for a lot longer period of time and still maintain the integrity of the data.
Now, define a lot longer period of time, because you said now no longer than 6 months if you have something with moving parts. What about a solid state?
With a solid state, I would say, still try to use it once a year or once every 2 years or so. Still don't let them sit for too long.
And that just means recording a couple of images, deleting if you're just getting some life going, something going in and something
going out. Plug it in and let an electric current go through it.
Gotcha.
For a little bit of time.
Maybe we can jump back just a bit to clarify some terms for us. That would be helpful.
So SSD and HDD, it's basically spinning hard drives versus flash-based hard drives. And you can't see me using air quotes when I said hard drives there for the SSD, because you don't really want to call them a hard drive. They're not a hard drive, but it's just a technology term that most people understand. So I still get caught up using it sometimes. But a solid-state drive is basically think of it as a heavier duty memory card. It's the same kind of flash-based memory. It's obviously better quality and higher speeds and whatnot, but it is similar to your memory card versus a spinning hard drive that is a disk that's spinning around and has a needle like a record that's reading and writing to that disk. Memory cards, the SSDs are being read to and written to by electronic currents.
It used to be, and the common belief was that you have archived images and they're in stable devices that are holding them for future generations. However, technology does change, these devices change and everything else. How often should you migrate archived files from one storage device to the next generation? I know it used to be they'd say every 7 years you should take all of your storage and migrate it over to whatever the newest and latest is, so you'll have another 7 years where you can open them and read them.
Right. I'd say sort of that 7-year timeline still holds. I usually tell people maybe once every 10 years, you want to look at old hard drives and SSDs and memory cards that you have and think about transferring them over to something new, because at a certain point, you're going to get to a situation where the physical connection ports on that device are no longer used on any computers, and it's hard to find adapters, or adapters don't exist. So it's going to be, you're going to find that about every 10 years that happens. But actually, I've been watching Thunderbolt 3, Thunderbolt 4, USB-C. There may be a lot more uniformity in ports going forward, this may not be as much of a thing in the next decade or 2 decades or whatnot, just because now everybody's realizing there's a lot more of a benefit to have a more universal standard, and then to sort of still try to support that standard. Whereas 20 years ago in the early 2000s, every computer maker was making their own ports. You had eSATA, you had, FireWire 400, you had FireWire 800, you had Thunderbolt 1, 2, 3. You were getting all these different ports because you had so many manufacturers doing their own thing, because there wasn't a lot of uniformity, and people didn't necessarily want to pay the licensing fees for one port versus the other. So they made their own. And I think they've all sort of realized the error of that way. So they're starting to see more standardization, which is why, you look at the side of your MacBook and there's a USB-C and Thunderbolt 3 port, and they're physically the same and they can connect the same, but they support different speeds and whatnot. The biggest thing you are going to run into, in 10 years is capacity. You're going to be reducing significantly more data 10 years from now, and these capacities of these drives aren't going to be usable at that point. So you are going to want to look to sort of archive them somewhere else. And so you will want to look to larger capacity storage options and archival storage options as your database grows.
A few questions I have about interface, and I want to go back to portable SSD drives. But while we're here, can we talk a bit about the cloud? I mean, because it seems to be part of the conversation.
I tell people always have a cloud backup, or always have an offsite backup of all of your data somewhere. Whether you buy a cloud service and use that, or whether you just get a second or third backup hard drive and you back up all your data and you ship it off to a relative in another state, or you put it in a lockbox in a bank, or you put it in your office drawer or something, you always want to have a copy of it. It's good to have a backup of your data, but you always want to have an offsite backup, because there could be a fire or an earthquake, or you could get robbed and all of your hardware is gone. And yes, you had a backup that's set next to your computer, but now you no longer have that backup and computer.
And the cloud versus, let's say, sending a drive to an office vault. I mean, is there advantages? I mean,
ease of use. It just depends on how much, how often you're updating, you're creating new data, and how often you want to keep that backed up. I don't use a cloud service as my offsite backup. I have another hard drive that just goes to my parents' house in upstate New York that sits there. And once a year, I bring it back to my home. At Thanksgiving, I bring it back to my home. I back up whatever is on my computer. And then at Christmas, I bring it back to them and it sits in their house for another year. But that's because my computer has not a lot of data on it. I'm not a photographer that is creating data constantly. So I don't need a backup. If I were to lose my backup hard drive in my computer, what's on that backup once a year is probably more than enough for me. But if you're a photographer who's shooting every week, an offsite backup isn't going to be something you can update easily or regularly. It's probably not a good option for you. So a cloud service probably makes more sense.
All right. And back to the interfaces for a second. I mean, I really appreciated what you had to say about this, this growing uniformity. Let's hope. But what is the standard now? What are people using? What is available in most computers?
Yeah, the standard right now for the most part is that USB-C connection port. That's pretty much in all current computers in the last, I want to say decade, if not, 5-7 years or so. And it works with USB-C, it works with Thunderbolt 3, and don't quote me on this, but I'm fairly certain it's going to work with Thunderbolt 4 when that one sort of comes into more prominence. So I think you're going to start to see that port stays the same. It will just support different speeds. You will have older legacy computers that are only USB-C compatible, and yes, both plugs will plug into them, but you'll only get the lower speeds out of some of the more legacy stuff. Actually, Thunderbolt 3 products won't work in USB-C only ports.
Okay. And in terms of the ports that are on drives themselves, because that seems to be all over the place. I mean, any recommendations and your thoughts on, what's the best, what's the fastest?
On the drive itself, most of the time it doesn't matter what the port is, because even the older legacy USB 3, that sort of rectangular, that USB A connection or the B connection, whichever the hard drive had, it's actually faster than the speed of an internal spinning hard drive. So the bottleneck of any external spinning hard drive is actually the drive inside rather than the port you're using. So in the terms of the speed you can get out of a spinning hard drive, it really doesn't matter which connectivity port you use, because you're going to get pretty much the same speed no matter what. The only difference I tell people is there are Thunderbolt 3 drives out there that are considerably more expensive than USB-C and or USB 3.0 drives, but they allow for daisy chaining multiple devices. So if you've got 5 hard drives or 5 Thunderbolt 3 products, you can connect them all into the one port in your computer by daisy chaining them off the hard drives. So if that's something you need to do, Thunderbolt 3 drives make more sense because you can connect more drives to them. And actually, some of our higher level Thunderbolt 3 products, like our shuttles and our multi-bay systems, they actually have power supplies in them and can actually send power to your laptop, so you don't have to waste a port using a power adapter into your laptop either. They can power the computer through the drive itself.
All right. And jumping back to SSD drives, I've been using a portable, a mini SSD drive with my computer now for a bit. Actually, I think after the last talk we had with you,
I was going to say, I think I gave that drive to you the last time we spoke.
I think to Jason, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, is that something that you would recommend as best practice? And where do you draw the line between what's considered a portable and what's a desktop drive?
Whether or not you look to SSDs or HDDs and hard drives, I tell people, what is your budget? Because SSDs are going to be considerably more cost per terabyte than a hard drive is. For example, a 1 terabyte SSD can run you, if you're getting a good quality one that's for photography and whatnot, it's going to cost you maybe around $200, whereas, enterprise class hard drive for photographers in 6 terabytes, I think, is our minimum right now. That's going to run you around $120 for that. So you get into significant cost differences, but there's significant performance differences. The SSD, depending on which one you get, they start at about 1,000 megabytes read-write speeds. So it's going to be close to 4 to 5 times faster than a spinning hard drive is going to be in terms of the data you can read and write to it. So you're going to get a lot faster speeds. You're going to get more reliability out of it. You're going to have something that you can travel with more. So if you're going between a studio and home or traveling, an SSD is what you're going to want to travel on, because even if you pad a hard drive nicely, it still can get damaged just by purely the jostling, the moving up and down that happens as you're walking or as you're carrying it, so to speak.
All right. Good to know. And maybe just a general question that I have here, and let's talk a high volume still photographer. what would you call the best setup? I mean, what would you lay out for somebody who really expects to be shooting a lot and wants to have their material backed up, but also accessible in a quick manner?
Yep. So again, it comes down to capacity, but an SSD, if 2 or 4 terabytes is enough capacity for you, an SSD is going to be a great, fast, reliable way to do that. But for a lot of photographers, they want a more centralized archival system. They want all their data in one place. That's where you want to start looking at hard drives, because hard drives right now max out at 18 terabytes. There's actually going to be 20 terabyte hard drives in single bays very soon. And that's where you can fit a much larger, more archival system onto. But
and
then,
how big is that? And how big is that physically? How big is that?
The hard drive itself, our enterprise class, our SanDisk professional ones are probably 8 inches by 2 inches by 5 inches maybe or so. So they're not large. Whereas by comparison, an SSD that can hold 2 or 4 terabytes, we're talking 0.5 inch by 3 inches by 1 inch or so. So we're talking significantly smaller physical footprint as well.
As you're rattling off these numbers, I'm thinking about how many negatives I used to be able to fit into the average shoebox.
Right.
And I'm trying to figure out how it compares. But
I would say you're talking like an entire Manhattan apartment building, compared to a shoebox. So
we've come a ways.
Right. But then, you want to look in, if you're looking at larger archival situations or more data, you want to start to look into either a 2-bay or a 4-bay hard drive system, a RAID system, because that's where you're going to, 2 or 4 hard drives can act as one, so to speak, and can afford you, a simpler interface for larger capacity. So if you, for example, and I'm sort of going to skip over the 2-bay systems for, we can talk about those in a little bit, but for an archival situation, I tell people to look at a 4-bay system, because a 4-bay system, you put 4 drives in there, can get up to 72 terabytes of data right now, soon to be 80 terabytes of data. And basically what a 4-bay system lets you do, you want to set it up in what's called RAID 5 mode. And RAID 5 mode writes the data across 3 drives and then sort of leaves the 4th drive as the redundant drive or the parity drive. And it writes data on a 4th drive in such a way that if you lose any one of those other drives, or if one of those drives goes bad, the data is still safe. It's written in such a way that, it acts as sort of a backup, so to speak. And so with that, you only get 3/4 of usable data, but you get a 4-bay system where your computer recognizes it. If it's a 72 terabyte drive, it recognizes it as 56 terabytes, and it looks like one physical drive that you can archive and centralize everything in. And you get the speed of 3 drives on your read-write. So you'll get 750 megabyte read-write speeds out of that as well. So that's what I start to tell photographers who are looking towards larger capacities, more centralized storage, who want to archive the 5, 10 hard drives that they've got lying around, and they want everything in one place because they want to catalog everything. You want to start to look into these 4-bay systems, because also that helps you future-proof yourself for the next 5, 10 years, because again, it's got enterprise class hard drives inside of it. So it's going to last you a really long time. But you're also going to have that significantly larger free space that you can continue to use for the next several years, hopefully.
Gotcha. Can you talk a bit about, and I'm something, this is kind of where I'm going out of my comfort zone here, but with HAMR, MAMMR, and mass MMAR?
That's more, it's a newer hard drive technology that's coming, and it's more laser-based than it is needle-based. And so it's basically a way that you're going to be able to read and fit more data on a spinning hard drive platter at some point in the future. So we don't have any drives yet that use that technology. And so it's coming, but eventually that's what's going to make spinning hard drives, whereas we're starting to push the limits, 20 terabytes are coming, 22 terabytes are coming as well, but we're really pushing the limits of what we can do on the space that we have for that 3.5-inch hard drive form factor. So, that the HAMR, MAMR, that's going to allow those spinning drives to start to get into, 30, 40, 50, 60 terabyte ranges.
I'm kind of curious about external recorders and how on video that's something that's much more common, at least it was, and I think cameras are making that to some degree less necessary. But is there any use for a photographer in this case to have an external hard drive where you're immediately loading to that drive?
Yes, there are a lot of and you'd probably only want to look towards an SSD drive for this feature. There are a lot of cameras out there that you can tether an SSD drive directly to it. And then you can shoot and capture directly to the SSD as well as your memory card at the same time, or just to the SSD. That, if your camera supports that, you're going to have significantly higher capacities, you're going to have faster read-write speeds, and you're not going to have to spend any time offloading your memory card somewhere else. So it's a great function to have if your camera supports it. Not a lot do, unfortunately.
Pete, as with last time, it's been a really great hour. Learned an awful lot. This is important stuff. It could be kind of techie and boring, but the truth is, this is important stuff, especially for long-term preservation of imagery. I know I have negatives that go back over 50 years. Any events coming up that you'd like us to know about?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the podcast. I always love coming on here, talking to you guys. And, we talk about some really good things because, part of what we try to do is really let people know things that they didn't know they needed to know. And that's sort of, I think, what we've talked about here is, the best practices of memory cards and hard drives and why one is better than the other. I do a lot of events and activities like this where I talk a lot more about other topics and more things. So if you guys like what you heard here, come to the B&H Depth of Field show, which is happening March 23rd and 24th, and look to the vendor sessions. I will be doing a vendor session. I believe my session is March 24th at 5 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be doing an hour, and I'm actually running a trivia contest where I'll be sort of asking questions along this line, seeing what you guys know, and then I'll be going into more in-depth answers along the lines of what you've heard me say here. And there's a lot more information that we didn't touch on. So there's a lot more that you probably didn't know you needed to know coming up in March. But that as well, if you're listening to this months from now, check out the B&H event space, because on a regular basis, maybe once every 2 or 3 months, I run a what I call a trivia night event, which I do this same sort of trivia contest, and we talk about these same best practices, and I'm sort of always updating it with the new stuff. So, come check it out. Look to the B&H event space for what our next event is going to be, and come learn more from us and ask your questions. And usually in those sessions, they're more interactive. So we actually have a chance to take questions from the audience, and I can actually answer what you guys want to know directly as well.
Pete, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
If you are not yet a subscriber to the show, we have a quick fix for that. Simply head on over to wherever you snag your favorite podcast and sign up. It's free, it's easy. And if anybody asks, just tell them Al sent you. All that said, on behalf of John Harris and Jason Tables, thank you so much for tuning in today.